Thanks very much for stopping by the Digital Creator Daily. If you're new here, I'm Rob from Hey Summit, and this is the daily-ish show where I get to have pretty awesome conversations with brilliant people doing interesting things. We talk about the creator mindset, staying authentic, assembling your toolkit, exploring platforms, and a bunch more things, maybe some random stuff as well. It's a pretty relaxed show about and for creators, for thought leaders, and independent entrepreneurs. And just a reminder, depending on how you are tuning in, whether it's live or recorded or on the podcast, conversation is best when it is shared. So however you're tuning in, please feel free to jump in with your thoughts, questions, perspectives, and thanks very much for joining us. I'm very, very happy to welcome Danielle. My dyslexia got the better of me. Danielle Letayf, who's the founder and CEO of Badassery, a marketplace for event organizers to book diverse public speakers. They're on a mission to give as many speakers a stage as possible and help event organizers run better and more efficient events. In her past life, she ran global community at Shine and was the head of programs and community for Built by Girls, a brand that's creating the new wave of tech leaders. She expanded the community from 5 to over 15,000 around the country and created the hashtag Built by Girls Challenge, a nationwide pitch competition for tech projects built by girls and judged by girls that she ran with Michelle Obama in 2016. Must have been super interesting. She loves dancing, wearing anything gold metallic. I agree with you there. Traveling and vintage shopping and chocolate. Always chocolate. I have to say that's going to be the death of me, but it's not that bad a way to go out. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me, Danielle, and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And it was cool because Michelle Obama's name was in my bio, so that's maybe where you got the Michelle.
I think I must have skimmed that and then seen that, and for some reason it just mixed around. I saw the 2 L's and the E at the end. Maybe that was it. But anyway, forgive me, Michelle.
No, oh my gosh, no problem. I'm so pumped to be here. Thank you for having me, Rob.
Yeah, no, it's all good. So like so we've known each other for a little bit of time, but I'd love to kind of. I don't think we've ever had this conversation just about your journey and how you came to start Badassery, especially maybe, I don't know, it's not just Badassery, but all the stuff that you've done before, this common thread of community and trying to bring others forward by pushing everybody else forward. So yeah, like what was the kind of spark or the story behind Badassery?
Yeah, it's a great question. So community, I feel like nobody ever intentionally falls into community. I don't know if you feel the same, Rob, but it's kind of just been like such a new thing the past few years. But I'll say that as I've been reflecting about how I got into it, I think a big part of it actually was just the way that I was raised, honestly. That's kind of like the OG place where community often is ignited. So I come from an immigrant family. They're from Lebanon, where, if you know anything about Middle Easterners, it is just like full of food, full of family, full of like all the things that you saw in my Big Fat Greek Wedding. And there was always these moments that were just so special where we all come together at once, like in a ritual, right? Like even to this day, I eat dinner with my family every day at old lady time, like 5 p.m. Eastern. When we have Christmas, it's like 30 of us stuffed in a house. And so I've always just been used to like the magic that comes together, that comes when you bring people together, the stories that are formed when you bring people together who are typically not together. And also like being a middle child, I've always been like in the middle of like sort of like a conduit for conversation. So I found myself often trying to make everybody happy, whether it's my siblings, my parents, my grandma. Yeah, right. Yeah. So just sort of like, always navigating conversations and not really knowing that I was trying to just make everyone happy and enjoy themselves all the time. And so I think I just always had a knack for people, listening to people, really wanting to know what they need. And so, I guess like taking it back to college, I had intended on studying psychology because I was just so interested in people. Obviously, my parents are immigrants. That's like a no-no. I love still psychology, but they're like, you need to do like business, doctor, all the things, lawyer. Everyone knows this, the saying. But yeah, so I started studying marketing and had always just been really drawn to social impact. I've been raised in quite a religious family. My school always had this this requirement for volunteering and all this stuff. So it was ingrained in me, but it's also something that I actually grew up really enjoying. So I think all of those things together sort of like helped with my path to community. Fast forward, essentially, I left college. I picked up and moved to New York I had never been there. I was just like, this is it. I'm going to do this, whatever this is. I had wanted to work in fashion. That didn't work out. So I was like, let me join a marketing company, very similar to fashion, right? Like, obviously. Right. So sort of had just kind of accidentally found out about Built by Girls, which you had just mentioned before this. And I was really young, and they were looking for the first sort of like person to run their internships for teen girls, the first person on their brand. And it was actually a brand under Verizon Media. And I was like, cool. Like, I've always been interested in starting things from scratch, but this was great because it was like a playground with a paycheck, right? It was like, oh, you gotta get, some solid money from corporate. And so I had joined them as their first employee and was just really intrigued by redefining what it meant to be in technology for teen girls, right? Like, we all know there's been this huge problem with diversity and gender gaps, especially in tech. And I've always just been really interested in sort of like it's kind of like telling a different story to get the point across. And that's where I had joined Built by Girls. I had started just creating their internships, but obviously I'm working with girls. So of course you have to pay attention to the community and cultivate that community. So during my time there, as you read, I ran a lot of events. I ran a lot of programs. And as I was traveling the country running these events and going to different events that had like all the buzzwords like tech, crunch, disrupt, innovate, iterate, killing it, tech. I was just so taken aback by who I saw on stage all the time, right? And you and I have talked about this, but it's just very similar stories that are shared on stage, very similar paths, especially a few years back, like 5 to 7 years ago, right? These conversations were just starting to happen. And if there were people of color on stage, it was just the same, like 1 or 2 all over the country. And there was like, whoa, are there like no other people of color who are doing cool things? Like, obviously that's not the case. And so that's sort of when I started to get my like passion for just amplifying different stories that haven't been told, especially as I was working with teen girls who were not seeing people like them on stage. It like was very painful for me. And so that's sort of where like that inkling had started. And then separately after that, left Built by Girls, started my own community, which was Badassery in New York. It was just an event series to bring people together. At the same time, I had joined Shine, which is a mental health startup where I ran global community there in-app. I'm going to fast forward. Then I started Badassery. Essentially, like, it has had a lot of iterations. It started as just a community where we had event series and brought people together. And now I'm like really, really trudging forward with the fact that we need to get more stories up on stage. So I'm happy to to elaborate on any of that, but that's sort of like the timeline.
That's awesome. So I there are a bunch of things that I'd love to jump into, but one thing that seems to be always there, it seems to be like a moon and a planet here, is community and business, and it's clear that you've always had a passion for community. Coming from, I come from a big family as well. We love getting together. Yeah, absolutely. It's anybody from South Africa who's Jewish, chances are I'm related. It's not a family tree; it's a family bush. It's that kind of a thing,
Stick together, yeah.
Oh yeah. But anyway, I do see sometimes though, like people who are they're just natural community builders. They are inspired and they get excited. It's not necessarily like being an extrovert. It's a community avert. You want to see other people connecting in front of you, and that fills you with glee. But
yes,
it's quite a different thing thinking about that and like thinking about something that is business or something that has KPIs and stuff like that. In a similar way that a lot of people who might be thinking about a side project, or maybe they want to be a coach, or they want to go off and start a restaurant. It's this idea that's great fun in their mind, but then once they start doing it as a business, it like ruins the fun. And so
totally.
I guess, like, did you ever go through that? Like, did you go through that? Like, I'm not having fun here and having to push through that? Or is it very much because on the flip side, like, I guess you could have it like it inspires you, it drives you. So like, what's your relationship with that?
Oh my gosh, Rob. I mean, anyone who thinks starting a company is fun all the time is nuts. It's like, I mean, you run a big one compared to mine. No, I mean, yeah, of course I went through that. And I think especially when I was running community at Built by Girls, it was so fun because they didn't have one. And so it was just like the world was my oyster. I could try a lot of things and sort of like I said, I had a paycheck, right? So I could try things. If it failed, it didn't have direct repercussions on the income of the brand. Technically, it did, of course, but like my income or the income of the brand or all those things. And so, yeah, for sure. I think the older I've been getting, I guess like later in my stage of community, the more that fun has not necessarily gone away, but with my business, as it has like obviously direct business impact, like running the community, it of course has been like, oh, this has become a little bit like repetitive, or this is less fun because there's so much pressure. And the second thing is that running communities is very exhausting. I think for anybody, like, you mentioned, I know you're one of these kinds of people, like where you identify with people so deeply that sometimes it's like too deeply. And I've had to understand how to put up those boundaries as I've been creating other brands, communities, or my own, where it's like I have given too much of myself and it's taken away my focus on growing the community in a strategic way or growing the business in a strategic way. So yes, there's always been a lot of these balances and a lot of this parts of community that are not sexy, right? Like that burnout piece, or doing the things that are redundant, like onboarding people to Slack, right? There's so many pieces of the experience that make a great one. But at the same time, having to really level up and think about it from the top down. So yeah, 100% I have gone through that. And actually, I'm curious, like, at what point did you start to go through that? If you did, I feel like every community leader sort of has that in their journey.
Oh, well, I wouldn't call myself a community leader. I don't think I'm organized enough to call myself a community leader.
Community lover. Yeah.
I love bringing people together. I love cooking food for them, but like, doing all the whole nurturing on social media and getting, prompting people to start conversations, I'm next to useless at. But I don't know. Like, I feel like certainly I get, maybe you're the same way. I get excited about knowing that I played a small part in someone getting something or linking up with someone, or fostering that connection. My mom fancies herself a matchmaker. She loves bringing people together, and she'll take credit for your wedding, whether you like it or not, that kind of a thing. So I've definitely, I definitely have that. And certainly like with Hey Summit, like that's the thing that's most exciting, seeing an event happen and knowing that 20,000 people have come and they've learned, and our software was just a little part of that. Like that really kind of gets me going, gets me excited. But yeah, I don't know. It's tough because you lose that awareness or that excitement when you get stuck, as you use the word trudging, and I thought that was a very good word, very appropriate word, when you kind of get in it and figuring out how to, your admin list is going off the chart, and you're not actually able to kind of enjoy that. And so it's tough. It is tough.
It's for sure tough. Yeah. And I think it's interesting to make sure you sort of like create these calculated moments of joy for yourself. I feel like, that's like the most operational thing I've said about community, but I've realized the more and more I'm building, my community is getting bigger and bigger. Yeah. I, in the OG phases, knew every single one of my members. Now it's weird for me that I don't know my members. Sometimes I don't know my speakers, and I want to stay connected so that not only, like, of course I want to build something great for them, but also just to keep myself motivated. So something I've done, I'm not sure if you've ever done something like this, which is just like have one call per week with a member, just to know that I actually am working with humans and it's not just these bios and headshots. And of course, to just like understand their experience, get the feedback, all that good stuff, but more just to actually, like you said, understand that the experience that I'm building, the product that I'm building is a piece of their professional journey. And that's really exciting. And it reminds me why I'm doing something. Like when you're going through the really, really tough times, which happen often, you just need that like little reminder, just like push another week, push another month, whatever it is.
I think that's absolutely right. I'm thinking of the image of being grounded, but in two ways. One, obviously people think, oh, you stay grounded so that you're not getting a big head. But also if you're not grounded, you might spark out, as in like actually having a rock or getting back to a little bit of basics. Feeling okay, being kind of settling in to whatever your role is. And you kind of do need that. Otherwise you certainly can get lost.
100%. Yeah, it's tough.
So kind of going back to your story a little bit, you're seeing all the same people on stage at different places. I have to say, like, as a straight white man, I think I will look at something like diversity, or at least I used to, maybe looking at diversity in speakers and attending events, and in some ways thinking, if I keep seeing the same people, is it tokenism? Is it actually moving the needle? Are people associating this person with expertise, or are they associating them with just needing to be there to fill a quota? And frankly, I can't really answer that. Like I think there is absolutely no way that I am qualified to answer that at all. But how do you kind of look at that as a potentially an initial motivation for why someone might want to interact with Badassery, that they do come from maybe a tokenism perspective? And how do you, I don't know, how do you deal with that?
I deal with that all the time, and it's quite frustrating, especially when I have phone calls with potential bookers. The assumption is that because, by the way, we have a ton of white people who are available for booking and speaking, and they're equally as talented as and the thing is, like, of course we have a focus on diversity, and the thing that has been the most frustrating is the assumption that because we are focused on underrepresented voices, that our speakers only speak about D&I or diversity and inclusion. And also, secondly, I know, like, I'm not playing the female founder card. We said we wouldn't talk about it, but because I'm a female founder, they also assume all my speakers are female.
Right.
And so it's kind of been like, the learning curve has been shocking for me to just without even, like, there is no copy on my website, in my promotional materials or anything about these little pieces of assumptions. And, innately, I'm not here to change people's assumptions. I'm here to put talent on stage and have them prove that, you can be like a Lebanese person and talk about community. You don't have to talk about diversity and inclusion or having an immigrant family. And so, I push quite hard when I get those inquiries or when I have those phone calls and saying, like, exactly what I told you, because we have a diverse pool of speakers. We only have like maybe 3 or 4 people who speak about D&I. If you want me to refer them to you, I'm happy to, but everybody else speaks about product marketing, engineering, all those things. And so I think the biggest battle for me has been trying to figure out if I even promote the fact that we have diverse speakers or if we just have speakers. And so I haven't even figured that part out yet, transparently. And I can't change people's intentions when they're booking. I'm not having a conversation with everybody, but what we keep our eye on, that something interesting that's been happening is that our speakers are actually keeping an eye out for each other. So for example, we had a booking for 2 panelists. They wanted 2 panelists from our speaker pool, and both of them were white women. And one of them stepped up and said, I'm happy to give my spot to somebody else so that we can have this conversation, have different perspectives. And that's just, I didn't tell them to do that. I feel like a proud mom, but I feel like all we can do is sort of just look out and speak up. I guess like that right now, that's sort of the way I've been approaching it. Basically, the 2 things is be very, very vocal about the fact that what we are and what we aren't. And then just encouraging, our speakers to continue to speak up on their behalves. Or even similar to you, I saw your LinkedIn, which I loved when I first connected with you a few months back, which is like, need a diverse speaker, like, go ask somebody else or whatever the case is. It sort of takes like a lot of these little soldiers to form an army, and it's happening slowly. And I think once we start actually having our speakers booked for their expertise versus their ethnicity, I think we're moving forward.
As like a business owner, right? And as you were saying, it's not your job to necessarily try and change people's minds. Your job is to get people booked. It must be hard. Obviously, if you run your own business, you have the luxury of saying no to working with someone, but that luxury is sometimes very costly. Like, have you had conflict internally as to whether or not to work with a customer just because they have a potential client, just because of their approach and like their motivations, and how do you try and unpick that? Because if it's not, obviously people watching might not be starting their own speaker, booking service, but they will have their own version of, I have this opportunity to work with someone, but maybe morally I have a problem, or I don't feel like I want to, or something like that. And it's very hard to convince yourself not to go through with something. It's not illegal. It's nothing untoward. It's more just, I just don't feel right. How do you think through those kinds of conversations? Because I imagine they must happen sometimes.
Yeah, they do. One instance is coming to mind from a while back where I think very similar to what you said, it just didn't feel right and I could not justify why. And I think this is the problem, right? Like you said, it's still a pretty early company. Now we're ramping up, but it was one of our earliest people who was interested, and wanted to book a lot. And as we were having a conversation, just like something in my gut was like, okay, this could be big opportunities, but you have to, my allegiance is not to the money that is coming in to my business. Of course, yes, I need to survive. I need to pay my speakers. Of course, my basics are covered. But my allegiance is to giving my speakers a very, very good experience. And on the flip side, giving my bookers a very good experience. And if I cannot do those two things at the same time, it's just not worth it. And so in this situation, the booker would have had an awesome experience. I could tell why they had wanted to book, because we had some of the top diverse talent in New York City at the time. And sometimes I try to understand what my gut is saying in, like, I kind of try to justify it with the facts, and you can't sometimes. But what I had done was say, okay, I have this weird feeling. Let me look at his broader team, or let me understand, where his broader team has come from. And sometimes it's not fair to make that assumption, but I had looked, done my research on the company and on the team and who's on top, and, had made some assumptions based on that. So it's not fair. I think sometimes you just have to trust the gut. But like I said, if I feel like I cannot give both sides of the marketplace a good experience, I'm not going to go through with it. And I feel confident that I will find a booker who's awesome and who I will want to work with and all that stuff in the future. But yeah, it's tough because, in the early stages, of course, you need a lot of money to come in to continue to grow. But it's always, I want to do things right now that will set a really, really solid and positive foundation so that referrals come in, or, speakers refer speakers, all these things that I know will pay off in the future.
I think that's a fantastic example, and I apologize for putting you on the spot like that. But no, okay. I do think that there's this wider issue of, especially when you're just starting out, do you broaden out? Other might call sell out, I don't know, broaden out and try and work with whoever you want, or do you try and carve out a particular niche, a particular focus? And this could be just in terms of not dealing with, not working with crappy people. It also could just be not working in a particular type of customer, closing off a business angle. And there's always this kind of pressure that you feel, and as you just said, like, I'm leaving money on the table. I don't know why I'm leaving money on the table. And it doesn't necessarily have to be for, maybe you wouldn't do cruise ships because you find that cruise ships cause too much headache for your speakers. And so you just don't want to do them, even though they're going to pay you $10,000 a speaker. I don't know. Right. So whatever it is, I think that sometimes people worry about lost directions, lost pathways that they could go down if they said no to something, and they undervalue the importance of creating proper, clear boundary lines in terms of where you will and will not go, or what kinds of customers you will and will not serve, because that means that the ones that you do want to serve will see you a lot clearer. Those lines will be a lot more defined. So just as you're saying, like, you need to have a solid foundation, maybe from a moral or an ethical standpoint, anything that you're doing, you shouldn't kind of be afraid of being a little bit prescriptive, a little bit more prescriptive, so that you can saying no to someone will mean that 3 more people that are much more aligned to whatever it is that you're doing will probably say yes in the future.
Yes, 100%. But the thing is, patience is so hard.
It's so hard.
And trusting that things look, it's unfair, it's hard, it's all the things. And I also want to add something too, which is like, I had quit my full-time job with a savings because I had worked a corporate job before. So when I had quit my job to start Badassery, I said, I have the luxury of patience. It's tough to say that if somebody's quitting and they feel so strongly about a product or a business that they can leave money on the table. I don't want to say do bad business, but I also understand the perspective of let me capture as much as I can within like moral realms, and then just maybe narrow down to just get the business going. So, I very intentionally wanted to start very, very focused, like you said, and I had not only the patience, but I had the money to be patient personally, right? And so I think it depends on every founder's journey, every founder's situation, especially founders who are not coming from highly educated places or whatever the case might be. So there's so many ways to take it. I'm always a fan of like mile deep versus mile wide. It's always how I've operated. It's still the ethos for my community. We're a very small community, but like it takes a lot to even get accepted into this community. So, it could go many ways. But I'm curious for you and Hey Summit, how did you approach it? Because your product can also be very, broad industry wise. Like, did you guys have this dilemma?
Yeah, we did. And I don't think we're particularly where we need to be on how we're approaching it. So like obviously like there are events that happen on the platform that sometimes are not great. And there are different levels of events that we have to take action on. But I think that plus like we like to see ourselves as an impact company. And yet, because everything's been so tumultuous over the past, year and a half, maybe that's an excuse that we tell ourselves, like we haven't been able to be as impactful as we feel like we could be. And that is, I think we failed in that regard in a couple of different ways. Mostly because we've kind of, when push comes to shove, a real impact company is impactful at their core, and they cannot function without being impactful. And what we haven't done that. We haven't been able to do that yet. And so like that to us is something, or at least certainly to me, is something that we need to reflect on and figure out a way of making that more part of our DNA. Or not making it part of the DNA, because you can't make your DNA, but like, lean into the fact that if we start doing some of the things that we kind of kept thinking about, talking about, planning, but that we never had time, or we didn't have budget for it, we didn't have this, we didn't have that, just figuring out a way of making it happen. That's what we need to do if we want to call ourselves an impact company. And so like that's been hard. In terms of the actual types of events, like we've had to like, we have a policy now, or a process that we can go through if an event is problematic, an objectionable content kind of process. We had never done anything like this before. We'd never tried to none of us came from any company that had to deal with this kind of sense of content. But one of the decisions that we have made is that we just don't want to be passive. So like one of the like Facebook and these the kind of social companies, they're very passive, and they default to freedom of speech. They default to freedom of speech as an excuse to not resource themselves correctly, and not turn off or was deplatform people who are obviously causing harm. And so we knew that we didn't want to be that. And so we feel like we're pretty clear. We probably could be clearer that, we have the right and we will deplatform anybody that we think is causing harm or being inappropriate. And that is not just hate speech and all the normal ones that everybody says.
Right.
And I think we have more to do to talk a bit about that, not so much to toot our own horn, but just to make sure that we're very clear, like, this is how a tech company should be behaving. Right. I don't know, just because you want to talk about something that is technically legal in whatever country you're talking about it, doesn't mean it have to be on here. So, and I think that kind of stuff we deal with, and we're trying to talk about, but we're certainly not there yet.
It's so tough. And I think often you don't know what you don't know especially when you're starting a business or running a business for the first time. And I think, to your point, like, I don't think every company has to be an impact business technically, but I do think but if that's what you want, it's awesome. But I do think, like you said, there has to be an intentionality about, if you do want to be an impact business, like, what does that even mean, even in terms of data and metrics and all that, right? It's not just like warm and fluffy. Otherwise, it just won't work. You can't really convince other people that you're an impact business. So yeah, I think, to your point, it's like sort of being less reactive, like companies to be less reactive and just more proactive, try to get ahead of things, not just like this whole like cancel culture situation. It's like you do something wrong, then you're out. But like, the problem is, like you said, there have not been these like clear parameters around what will cancel you or what whatever the case might be. So it's really tough. But I mean, I love that's you're trying to alter your DNA. It feels very scientific, and I love it.
It does feel very scientific. And for us, it's not necessarily about like canceling different people, but I feel like if we're open enough to say, look, your event, we cannot support it, and we can't host it. Very likely, we could be wrong about this. We could be, you could take us to task publicly and we could get slammed for it, whatever. But this is what we believe. This is the science right now. And so this is what we, in certain circumstances. And so we very well admit that we're putting ourselves out there by saying we could be completely wrong about this in a few years' time. Right. But we're making the decision anyway, and we're sorry. And we're going to try and make this as easy as possible, but this can't happen anymore. So like, I think that if you're approaching something like that with a little bit of grace, a little bit of empathy, or quite a bit of empathy, then, and kind of acknowledgement that, you might be wrong, but we're just making the decision, and we're sorry, but you're going to have to be okay with that. Like, I think that's a much better way of interacting with, you're respecting the other side. You're saying, we just can't work with you. And I think that also, certainly people who are, maybe you're starting an agency out there, or maybe you're starting to consult with people, there are ways that you can, I think, you talk about like redefining what it means to be professional, right? But it also doesn't mean that every professional relationship that doesn't go ahead isn't some sort of personal animosity or rooted in personal animosity. And I think we can all maybe practice just being a little bit more separated from whatever decisions we're making from a personal side.
No, it's true. And I really like that essentially what you're saying also is like, we have our values as a company, we will push them even though people might not agree with them. And honestly, it's a great reminder that there are humans running companies and brands, right? Like, I think oftentimes there's sort of like this huge wall between products and people, and they forget that there's like a team of people who have strong core beliefs. So I like that approach a lot. It's hard to do sometimes, yes, but if you do it with love and with empathy, like you said, it'll be awesome.
So I guess we've gone all around the show. I guess the last thing I kind of wanted to talk about, like, there was something that you had said earlier about like kind of battling or letting go of imperfection, and you came from not a corporate background, but you did work in corporate for a while, and yes, you might have had a little bit of a buffer to allow for some patience, but I imagine that day one you were really expecting to make some money. So and then when it didn't happen in day two, you'd be like, oh crap, are all my days going to be like that? And so I guess this can be a very lonely experience, especially you've put yourself out there. You've probably said goodbye to money. and comfort. So how, especially maybe in the early days, how did you deal with that loneliness, or did you? I mean, maybe you just had a community, but yeah. How did you work through that as like as an early founder, unsure of the direction?
Oh yeah. I mean, 100% I've dealt with loneliness, and it's been interesting because it's gradually increased over time. So when I had started my community, I was my community. It was like, it started with my friends, or it started because I was like, I want a place to go that doesn't exist just yet. So I was creating experiences I wanted. I was bringing on people who I would hang out with. And there was a point, this sort of inflection point where when I had mentioned, like, we started to get bigger and I didn't know the people, and people were looking to me to lead more. People were looking to me to create experiences they wanted, not necessarily the ones that I wanted. And there was a point where I was like, whoa, I think I just either like got kicked out of my own community, or not kicked out. It was not, that extreme, but I sort of graduated from it somehow. I did not expect it. It was kind of like you build and you build and you build. And it was at the same time as my other, working at Shine, working at Built by Girls, all these pieces where it was like together. And I could always go to them and be like, hey, like this is going on at my job. Like, can you guys help me? So it was my place. And then I think over the pandemic, when everything went to shit, I had to figure out like, okay, how do I take care of my community? I don't have time for me right now. It's like everything is confusing. I realized like, yeah, I don't have the luxury of being a part of this community in the way that I did. And that felt really scary, actually, because it was also a very emotional time for the whole community, right? There were a lot of social justice movements happening, obviously COVID, I mean, a million things. So and more as we've been growing, as I've had to sort of like build my speaker pool, feel like very responsible for them getting gigs, for them getting paid, for all these things where it's like, I kind of feel like a parent, like a single parent being like, I'll figure it out for you guys. But I'm like, what's going on? Where is this business going? So to answer your question, number one, yes. I mean, super lonely journey, especially now as we're on the cusp of just like, I feel like breaking through. And maybe, it's the first time I'm running a business. It's my first time bringing one to this much success to date. So that's really terrifying. But in terms of the ways that I handle it, I mean, I just kind of close my eyes and run sometimes. So I'm just like, okay, I don't know what I don't know. Once I get over the fact that like it won't be embarrassing to ask someone like, what does like a CRM mean? I've asked all these questions that I just never learned. And, none of my parents are business people. Like, I just don't know this stuff. So I've just sort of, I think the basic for me was to go into this saying, okay, this is your MBA, or this is the thing that other people do that like, would cost the same or whatever it is. And so I approach it like a student. There's never a point where I feel like I've made it, right? I've learned very early on, like, it's kind of like this, you're like, you get a huge booking or you get a lot of interest, then the next day it's like nothing for weeks or whatever. So I've learned to stay very neutral, approach things in like just a very neutral way, in a very like studenty way. And I also like, I have a lot of conversations with people like you who are either like a little bit ahead of me or ahead of me, who I just feel like are very values oriented, very, very aligned with me, and just like help me get through specific functionalities, right? Like with you, I really admire the way you run your business, the way you know the event space. I have a person who I go to when I need product help. I have a person who I reach out to when I need marketing help. All these things, I think so far people have gotten me very far. So yeah, I think like to the point of perfection, like it's not even about working in corporate. It's just about being raised the way that I've been raised, which is, my parents came here, they sacrificed a lot. We went to very rigorous schools. We had no room for mistakes, and it's just been ingrained in me. So once I realized like that was actually holding me back from moving forward faster, I think I've like felt much freer now.
That's absolutely spot on. No room for mistakes. Whereas you really kind of, you need all the mistakes, otherwise you won't move.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. Well, I know we've chatted a lot longer than we thought, but thank you so much for making a bit of time, Danielle, and chatting and sharing your insight here. Anybody out there want to learn more about Danielle and Badassery, you should check out badasseryhq.com. That's badassery-hq.com. And thanks so much again, Danielle. Have a great day.
Oh, thanks for having me, Rob. That was